All right. What's going on, everyone? Boys, girls, gamers, opinions, enthusiasts. Today, I'm going to be sharing my opinion on the newest season of Baki Hanma, Son of Ogre. So, if you don't understand Baki or haven't seen the previous seasons, I have no clue why the fuck you'd be here watching this. But with that out of the way, I finished it today. And oh boy, I got some thought. I got some thoughts. So, in general, I'm just gonna put it out there right in the beginning. I actually wrote down a lot of notes for this shit too, because there was so much stuff I needed to keep track of opinion wise. But the first thing is, this is Baki, and you just need to just turn off your mind. Overall, I had a great time watching it. I like Baki. Baki's cool. It's nonsensical. It's crazy. It's silly. And I feel like this season more so was a lot more silly than the other ones. But overall, you kind of have to go into Baki just ignoring certain things or just turning your mind off and just accepting it for what it is. Because it's so fucking crazy. Now, excuse me. Talking about the beginning, right? I feel the beginning, and there's going to be very light spoilers until the end. Once we get to the end, I'll, just reiterate again how much I love the show. But, I'll definitely say at the end when I'm going to get into kind of heavy spoilers, but until then, I'm going to be getting into very light spoilers. So, overall, the beginning of the show was kind of slow. And it's slow in the sense like there's not much actual fighting, but it's a lot of like story and lore building. I feel like overall for this whole season of Baki in the prison, because that's basically the whole like point of the season, it was really good storytelling wise and lore. It's like I felt like when I was watching it, I was never disinterested. Although we'll get into the bad parts of what I think of the story. But overall, the story was really good. And lore wise, it was just really good. The way they set up their characters, the way the characters are. Baki in general does a great job at building up character like hype. Character hype and character strength. They have like episodes worth of like, oh, these characters are gonna fight eventually, but they're not gonna do it yet. But you're gonna see what they're kind of capable of and what other people feel about them, and especially that last part, how they're viewed by other people, is really important in Baki because it gives the characters a lot of fucking life. Like, there's a character in the show in this season, Gavaru, where they hype him up like crazy, and you see little bits and pieces of what he does in the episodes before he has his big fight of like what he's kind of capable of, and you get excited like, oh, if this guy's capable of this in like this nonsense scenario, imagine what he's gonna do in the actual fight. So overall though, I thought this season was a lot more lighthearted than the other one, and I'm comparing this directly to like the previous season with the tournament, the Raitai tournament, and the previous season before that of the Prisoner Escapes. The Prisoner Escape season I felt was like the most like not lighthearted one at all. Like people fucking died in that shit, or at least I wish they did. All the prisoners didn't die, but yeah, I'm gonna be spoiling previous seasons of Baki if you're not aware. But the fact that none of the prisoners die made it a lot more lighthearted than I thought it would be. But it was pretty dark. Like the prison fucking inmate arc, which is different from Baki being in prison arc, which is this one. That one was super dark, and the last one was super dark too. I mean, look at the fucking last one with the tournament. Fucking Yujiro tore that guy's fucking face off. Like, Jesus Christ. There's like, I could think of one dark moment that happened in this entire series, and it's a guy getting shot. And it's like a no-name character who you don't even care about. He just gets shot. And like, I think that's probably the only death I remember. And yeah, in general, like the season is pretty lighthearted. It's not as bad as other seasons. It's not as dark. Like I said before, the storytelling is great. Like, we get a lot of just introspection, or introspection is not the right word. We just get a lot of like screen time of just storytelling, backgrounds, how people feel, what people are doing, their motivations for things. There is a lot of that in this season. And this kind of goes into one of the bad parts of it kind of detracts from the fighting and takes away from it. But we'll go into that. We'll go into that a little bit later, rather, at the end. So, because there's going to be a spoiler with that. So, overall, though, Baki is just ridiculous. Like, at first, when I saw Baki, the first season I saw was with Spec and them, the prisoner, escape arc. And I was like, okay, this thing's pretty ridiculous. It's getting, like, kind of, like, near the limits of what humans are not, or are probably capable of, but it's definitely going into fiction. Like, this shit is going crazy of just, like, what these people are capable of. And especially in the last season, it kept that up. And this season, I feel like it's a lot more grounded, but it's still funny. Like, these people are a lot more akin to, like, okay, like, in reality, probably someone could do this. Although, and I'm saying this now not as a bad thing, it's a good thing, but it's kind of something you have to, again, turn your mind off for. The characters in Baki, they just either tank hits or they just don't. Like, there's so many times in this season where someone gets hit and they literally get, like, flung across the whole, like, 9 yards of, like, the fighting area they're in, get slammed into the wall, break concrete with, like, their skulls, just get absolutely hammered, and then they get up like it's nothing and they just bleed a little bit and they're bruised a little bit. And I feel like there's actually no lasting damage, and a character's, like, tankiness is simply dependent on how much story relevance they have. And I'll get into that again later, but you kind of have to throw out the thought of, like, okay, these characters are taking hits, maybe it hurts, maybe it's doing something. It really doesn't. Like, it really doesn't matter. So, anyway, we're kind of going to go into the little bad here now. That was a lot of the good, and we're going to mix in a little bad here, but still not super spoilers. So, there's a lot less fighting in this season. It's a lot less, and especially with Baki. Like, the whole show is about Baki, but one thing I liked what was it didn't focus on him. Like, the prisoner arc focused on the prisoners for the most part. You didn't see much of Baki. The other arc was a tournament. You saw Baki in a couple fights, but other people, you saw their fights too. And that's not a bad thing, but overall, I think not only did Baki not fight a lot in this season, there was just not that much fighting in general that actually mattered. I think off the top of my head, after watching this over, like, the past 2 or 3 days, I can count maybe 3 or maybe 4 actual serious fights that occurred in this season. I feel like there was more in other seasons. I'm not going to count it, but there feels like there's a lot less fighting. And the actual fighting, it's always nonsensical and stupid as ever. But the fighting just feels a lot more bad in this season. Like, everything else about the season is good, the story and everything. And aside from the final fight at the end of the season with Baki being, the final, like, match, which I'm not going to spoil who it is if you don't know, but you really should. It's like, most of the fights were just, like, stupid. Like, there's one classic Baki fight, I would say. And then the second one was, like, a nonsense fight that just didn't make any sense. It was just silly. Like, oh, I'm gonna grab this handkerchief and you have to hold on to it while we beat the shit out of each other. Why are we doing this? Because we're men. And then right after that, literally exactly right after that, oh, this is stupid. We're men, so let's just beat the shit out of each other. And I feel like that happens a lot in this show. It's like, okay, some person has some weird, like, stipulation, or they have a technique that's good. And they're just doing it, and then out of nowhere, they're just like, you know what? Screw this. We're men. Let's just beat the fucking ever-living daylights out of each other, and that's how we're gonna settle this. Screw techniques. Let's just hit. And I'm like, bruh. It's so silly. It's so silly sometimes, and it felt weird. Now, another problem I had with the fights, which is so weird, because, like, again, there's, like, 3 fights that are, like, main fights in this show, and they're just stretched out. Like, it feels like so long. They'll be fighting, right? And then some person will use a technique, and the show will go into the history of the technique, who, like, first invented it, when it was used, the backstory of that character, why they used it, what they were doing at the time. And it happens for every technique. I shit you not. In the second big fight of the show, like, they use, like, I forgot even how many because I didn't keep count, but they use all these different, like, techniques or, like, stipulations to fight. And it's just like, okay, this stipulation's used. Instead of watching the whole fight, we're going to see the history of why this stipulation was used. Okay, now this guy's going to use this, like, fighting technique. Okay, we're going to see his backstory, why he's using it. And then, like, we finally get to see him use it. And every time, almost every time, some new technique is introduced or some stipulation, they always go into the history of it, and it just stretches out the fight so much, and it interrupts it to like a really jarring degree. It's like, Jesus, can we just get the fight over with? It's like crazy. And it like there's a fight that's probably like 3 episodes long that was stretched out because they had to go over all the history of all the techniques and shit. It was so stupid. But the fighting is definitely like a weak point of the season, I feel. The actual like really good fight at the end of the season was probably the only like decent one. The other ones like were either so short or so silly and stupid, or just so ruined by like the history lessons that were in them. It was crazy. Now, like I said, they're more grounded just because there's less of them. There's like 3 main fights. They're more grounded for the most part, aside from the people just tanking hits like it's nothing. But it is what it is. Now, there was some story hole plots that occurred. Well, not story hole plots, but the whole story was very silly and very confusing. I'll give it this though. A lot of the season is funny. The season itself is funny because you just see a lot of the characters, instead of fighting, they're literally just interacting, talking to each other, seeing what's going on, like saying nonsense, goading each other into trying to fight, but they're not going to do it, so then they just start chatting it up. Like, it's really silly, but not in a bad way. It's more funny. But the fighting was definitely the weak point. The story and dialogue was great. The fighting was the weak point. So, overall, this is probably where I'll leave it for the light spoilers. Like, it was good. Overall, if you're a Baki fan, you're going to like the season. It was really good. It's just, to me, there was a shift away from fighting, and the fighting itself wasn't that good in general. And there's 3 fights, and like only one of them I could honestly say was with Baki. Like, there's not many fights that Baki had. Like, an actual fight was probably the one at the end, and that's all Baki got. The rest of the series is just watching other people do nonsense, and it's not even like that good all the time. So, that's it for spoilers. Overall, great show. Or that's it for light spoilers. I was about to say no spoilers. So let's go into the things that just didn't make sense. So, Gavaru, right? The Mr. Second of the season. The guy who's like the second strongest in the prison next to Oliva. I was so confused why the fuck he was in the prison for the longest time. Now, eventually it gets explained that, okay, he really honestly just came here to like try and beat Oliva because he was curious. But they give some like ass sort of explanation in the beginning where it's like, oh, President Bush, you know, wants him to do it or some nonsense because like President Bush has someone on his detail so they could be equals with like Gavaru's country, so he could like have Gavaru help it. Like, it was so weird and I was getting so confused. I was like, why the fuck is he here? Now, Gavaru in general, again, story-wise, he's a great character. I love him. I love his look. I love his personality. I love the way he acts. He's a really good character. The way he fights, though, is stupid. This guy should not be number 2. This guy, Gavaru, has like one good trick up his sleeve, and that's what he does with your ear, where like he makes you like lose balance and like your sense of I guess motion with what he does with your ear. But aside from that, he has no real technique or anything, and I was surprised. I was like, this guy basically just has a trick, and everything else he has is just, okay, I'm gonna punch you. And it's super surprising. Again, there's not many fights in this season, and Gavaru's fight, I felt it was good to watch because it was silly and stupid, but it was just like Gavaru has like no technique. And then the one time he tried to use like a technique where he was like, oh, you know, throughout all of history, man has not really refined fighting. Like, oh, sometimes we lose faith in muscles, then we have to re-get it back later when we realize muscles can beat weapons. And like, he was saying something like kind of profound, or he was trying to. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to use this technique that is like crazy that no one else thought of, that has to do with like how you step on the ground and how you feel the earth beneath you. And then he just got one shot. And I'm like, he has no real techniques. He's just a clown. I don't understand how he's so powerful, aside from just you can tank a lot because you're story relevant, and you just have that one cheap trick you do with the ear on people. Aside from that, he's just tough and he just hits you. Like, it's so silly. But overall, I like Gavaru. I just don't like his fighting. Like, it was fun to watch. It was silly to watch, but it's like, whatever. And again, this season of Baki was funny as hell. Oliva is funny as hell. And just seeing the the fucking interactions between him and basically anyone, Givaru and Baki, like just seeing how he interacts with them is fucking hilarious, especially Baki. Baki tries so many times to piss this fucking guy off, and eventually, try as much as you will, you're gonna succeed, and Baki fucking succeeds, and it's funny watching Baki piss this fucking guy off. Now, another thing I don't like, right? The final fight was good. They had their techniques and everything. Like, okay, you know, Baki has this technique, Oliva has this technique. It's not fair to say this is like heavy spoilers. This is light spoilers, or medium spoilers, because I'm not including like a lot of details. But they both have their techniques, right? And eventually, Baki stops using his because Oliva uses his, and Oliva counters Baki's. And then eventually, Oliva stops using it. Oliva could literally win against Baki, but for some reason, he's like, no, this isn't how a man fights. I'm not going to do this. And then he stops using his technique that will literally beat Baki and just win. Although I guess there's a reason why Baki kind of counters it a little bit eventually. But I feel like that's just a stupid workaround. Like, Oliva could have kept using it if he really wanted to, if he was careful. It was just really dumb. But I guess they explained it because Baki eventually countered it because Oliva kept using it. But I don't know. The final fight between Baki and Oliva, again, like the other fight with Givaru, just devolved into where men were going to hit each other. And I do not understand in any world or in any universe how Baki can tank more hits than Oliva. As muscle bound and as heavy as that guy is versus a fucking 18-year-old who weighs like huge amounts of times less than him, tanking his hits better than like he could give it. It's like it doesn't make sense to me how Baki won. Baki literally won because the story like needs it. He won because he's just Baki. There's no rhyme or reason. He's literally just stronger somehow. Even all of us like supposed to be stronger. Baki's just stronger even though Oliva has more muscle mass, which makes no sense. And Baki's able to tank and deal more damage than Oliva, which again makes no sense. Because Oliva's whole thing is he's stronger and he's tankier. And there's not like it's some special technique Baki used, like he hits you in the neck. No, it was literally a JoJo's fucking punch out of I'm just gonna hit you and you hit me until one of us collapses first. And it was so silly. The whole season though, overall, despite like that thing I said, you know, it's kind of a complaint. The weakest part of this whole season was honestly the fighting. The lore and the story and them explaining it was all nice, even though it sometimes detracted from the fighting. And this season has way less of an emphasis on Baki. But that's not always a bad thing. It's just the fights were not that plentiful and were not that good. The classic Baki fight I enjoyed though was the three members of Mouth versus Givaru. That was to me a kind of classic Baki fight, but it didn't really feel like a fight because once one side started winning, like the fight was over. Like the fight didn't even continue. They just stopped it there. And I was like, okay, we kind of got cock teased. So hopefully the next fight with Givaru would be good, right? And it was silly, but I don't know. It was so weird. Like a Baki fight, you expect, okay, they have a technique or they have something about them that they're going to use. Like, I'm thinking back to the prison arc, right? All the prisoners in the prison escape arc had some sort of technique or ability that was unique to them that they used that made the fights interesting. Like, Spec had his fucking apnea rush bullshit. Fucking the Russian guy had, like, you know, the stuff hidden in his body. Yanagi had the poison. I don't know what Doyle had. Honestly, Doyle was just a wild card. He was just weird. But, like, all of them had something cool. Fucking, Dorian had, like, the martial arts that we found out, like, he had the past. And, like, they all had something, and they had some sort of technique that defined their fighting. They literally say in the thing, yeah, Givaru was taught in this sort of, like, martial art or ninjutsu. I think it was ninjutsu. Like, yeah, his grandfather taught him this. But then when they, like, ask him, like, oh, what type of fighting do you use? He literally says, oh, I don't use any type. And other people comment, yeah, he doesn't use any type of fighting. And it really shows. He literally just does nonsense, and he just punches. Like, it was so boring, and, like, I expected more. The fighting, I expected more. The story was great. Overall, I did like it. But those are my kind of complaints for the show. But overall, it was a good season. I like it. I'm excited for the next one. I just hope it doesn't take forever coming out. But overall, it was good. I mean, I hope you enjoyed. It was great. Just don't go into the season expecting great fights. That's it. I hope you enjoyed. I'm out of here.